Welcome to the second episode of Talkin Jets. I've got our panel here with us again. We got Green Bean, Matt O'Leary, and David. Green Bean, we'll start with you. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. It's my fault that we're late, everybody. I unplugged my computer at the last second, so I sincerely apologize. So now I'm just settling down from my anxiety attack.
David, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, man. Ready to talk some Jets tonight.
I love it. Matt, how you doing?
Doing good. Excited to be back for episode number 2, boys.
I love it. I love it. All right, guys, let's jump right into it. Avery Williamson, going to be the first topic of the night. Do we cut him? Do we keep him? He's due an $8.5 million cap hit. If we cut him, we save $6.5 million. What would you do, Green Bean? What is your opinion on the matter?
Oh, I'm keeping him. If it's my decision, I'm retaining Avery Williamson. I think one of the biggest disappointments for me last year was the fact that we never got to see Williamson and Mosley together on the field. We had the pass rush issue, we had potential cornerback issues, but one issue we did not have in our heads starting the season was that middle of our defense. That was going to be a strong point, and we never got to see it. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I think saving the $6.5 million, what are you going to get in that area of the field to provide what he does? I think we would regret it for $6.5 million.
I think that's interesting. What do you think, David?
Honestly, this is kind of something that really goes both ways, because there's a portion of the fan base saying that we should keep him, and there's a portion of the fan base saying that we should cut him. And of course, you can make the argument for cutting him because you could save that money, especially since not a lot of people are exactly willing to pay $25 million to two all-pro inside linebackers, and especially since we have a lot of other holes on the roster, and $7.5 million in cap savings is actually pretty solid. But however, I'm more in favor of keeping him because I would make that argument if you're breaking the bank for him and you have Hewitt and Burgess still under contract. This isn't exactly the case. I believe Burgess is supposed to become a restricted free agent, I know. And then Hewitt, you'd still have to give him a deal as well. And then Blake Cashman is coming off an injury. So if you cut Avery Williamson after CJ Mosley, sure, you could save $7.5 million, but I think, in my opinion, you're creating another hole on the roster. I think Hewitt and Burgess are really just serviceable as depth players, and Cashman is still coming off an injury himself, and he's a relatively unproven as well. Especially, you also look at the offenses that we have next year, like the Chiefs, like the Seahawks, like the 49ers. You want to have the best chance you have on defense, and Avery Williamson overall is the better player. And like Green Bean was saying, you want to have that chance to see those two wreak havoc up the middle, since this probably could be the best position we have on defense, especially with all the holes we have on defense that we still need to address. So this isn't a player that you're not breaking the bank for. This is a player you're not breaking the bank for. He's got Pro Bowl, if not all-pro potential. I'm keeping him on the roster.
What do you think, Matt?
I'm going to disagree with you guys. I would cut him, and that's not because I dislike Avery Williamson. I think he's a fine player, but I don't think you know what he's going to be in 2020 coming off this injury where he missed all of 2019. Ultimately, I think inside linebacker is actually one of the positions the Jets have some decent depth at. We named some guys. Neville Hewitt you could bring back for relatively cheap. Burgess, I thought, did a really nice job filling in. And then you have Blake Cashman, who flashed a little bit earlier on before he got hurt. So those are three guys right there who I think did a relatively good job of filling in for Williamson when he was, gone for the entirety of last year. And this defense, even without him, was still, 10th, 11th in defensive DVOA. I think they could be a really good unit. And then you could take that, whatever it is, $6-7 million in cap space that you're saving, and maybe that's the difference in keeping a Robby Anderson or, addressing another position on the offensive side of the ball. To me, the Jets are like middle of the pack in terms of cap space. And if they can get their way up closer to like 80 million in cap space, I feel a little bit more comfortable in addressing positions of needs like the offensive line and potentially wide receiver also. So yes, it stinks to see a guy like him go. I thought he was really good for the Jets in 2018, but I think they could fill that need in cheaper and other ways and use that money elsewhere on the roster.
So I fall in line with Matt on this one. I think I'm very much in the I wanted to see what happens with Avery and Mosley camp, but at the same time, I don't see us paying two inside linebackers top 15 money. I just don't see Douglas wanting to do that. Unfortunately, I think because we're locked into Mosley, Avery is probably on the way out. The one thing I will bring up is that there is no deadline on cutting him, which means there's no like roster bonus that's due the third day of the new league year, or any time frame on it. So one thing that I think would be an interesting option, and it depends how much value you think Avery Williamson has. Let's say hypothetically, we're sitting at 11, and let's say the Jaguars are sitting at 9, and Andrew Thomas is starting to fall. He's sliding down the board. The Browns are going to take him at 10. With the Jaguars, who need linebacker help, would you move Avery Williamson plus your number 11 overall pick? Would that be enough to get it done, to get up over the Browns? That valuation would be roughly 100 points in the draft value trade chart, which would put Avery Williamson's value at about a third-round pick, a late third-round pick, basically a compensatory third-round pick is what that would value him as. Would you trade Williamson to get up with the Jaguars? Do you think that's even feasible? Green Bean, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use one of Matt's points for this particular subject, which is we don't know what Avery Williamson's going to be. I doubt that the Jags are going to be willing to accept that compensation to move back 2 spots, especially when, I mean, there's a mindset that they could probably still get the same guy that they want at 11 that they could at 9. But I don't know if if Avery Williamson, coming off a devastating knee injury that knocked him out for the entire season, is going to be of interest to them, quite frankly. Because then when you make a move like that, then you're less inclined to actually use capital to, as well, to bring in somebody for that position. So then they're going to have Avery Williamson, a big fat question mark, to fill that need at linebacker. I don't know how realistic that was. Now, would I do it? Probably from our end. I think that's the kind of thing. If we're getting value, specific value with a face on it, I think I'd be more willing to look at moving Williamson. But just to cut him for the cap space, I have issue with that.
David, what about you? What do you think about the potential of trading Williamson, even if it's not to move up in the first round? What do you think we could potentially do? Is there any other team that you think might look to trade for him, or what do you think his value could potentially be?
Well, I mean, I would have to agree with Kyle on this, especially this is a guy that's coming off a serious injury, so he's a relative unknown. But I think if you were to try to actually, I don't want to say get rid of Avery Williamson, but not keep him on the roster, I would say maybe your best bet would be to trade him. Like, sure, maybe you could get a third or fourth round pick, but the Jets need to stock up on draft picks because we have, like I said, we have a lot of holes on the roster, and we're not exactly like a big free agent away from being a contender. And if you have a new general manager, Joe Douglas, who wants to build through the draft and you want to get as much draft picks as possible, you could see what kind of value you could get for a guy like Avery Williamson. Now, in regards to your trade, Ryan, I kind of find it hard to believe that the Jaguars could take that, especially since they have a top 10 pick. And I feel like they're going to really try to build around through their offense, especially when they got a quarterback like Nick Foles and they got a young backup like Gardner Minshew. They could have an opportunity to really address their offense, which is light years ahead of ours, and they could probably get one of the offensive linemen. They could have the best chance to get an offensive lineman, or they could get one of the top receivers. So I don't think the Jaguars would do that trade specifically, but I would try to see what you could get out of him in regards to maybe a potential draft pick.
What about you, Matt? You think there's any shot we trade Williamson at all?
I don't really think so. From the point that you brought up, I would do that from the Jets' perspective. I don't think Jacksonville would do that just because I don't think that he's has enough value. If you tried to move him at this point, like he missed a year, we have no idea what this guy is. Granted, when he was healthy, he was a very, very solid player for this team. I think that it's really just going to come down to them ending up cutting him or keeping it. I don't think a trade is really in the cards. So at that point, I think Joe Douglas is just going to say, well, this team has a bunch of other holes in other areas. I'm going to use this money instead of paying, like you were saying, to top interior linebackers. I think he's going to take that money and then look to, again, like address a position on offense.
I agree. I think that's probably what ends up happening. He'll wind up getting cut. We'll save 6.5 million against our cap. And I think that is a good segue into another player that we're all hoping comes back,
I
but
actually have a question.
doesn't.
Sorry,
I'll go. What's up?
I actually want to intervene in that. So you guys are cutting Avery Williamson. So if you want to bring back Neville Hewitt, what kind of contract would you give Neville Hewitt? Because you still got to bring him back too.
I'm not spending a ton of money on inside linebacker. That's kind of where I'm sticking. I don't care necessarily what it is, as long as it's not something over the top, because I would just as soon, sign any one of the other guys that
What
we
would your
have
offer
there.
be though?
I don't know. It's tough to say. I don't want to give him anything. Starting caliber money is probably 5 million, so maybe you give him 4 or 5, somewhere in there. Avery would get on like a trade would get 6.5. Normally do 8.5. So yeah, if you can get him for 5, maybe.
5 million. What about you, Matt?
I don't think it's going to cost very much to retain Neville Hewitt. I'm thinking like I was thinking $4 million before, so I think probably give or take $1 million one way or the other.
You want to know why, Matt? Because he sucks. That's the problem with Neville Hewitt.
He's nothing.
No, and look, and I like him. I actually do, and I agree with Matt what he said earlier. I thought Burgess was the one to really look at from last year. I thought he had a great year, but we're talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, the Dolphins, of course, and the beat up Steelers, and with their fifth string quarterback and all that sort of stuff. Next year, we're bringing the big boys to town. We got the Seahawks, the Chiefs, the Niners. I don't know. I think that's where a guy like Burgess and especially Neville Hewitt, who is weak, very weak in coverage, we would get exposed and we would be yelling about keeping him. And I want to keep him, but I think back up, and that's why I want it. That's
Exactly.
why I think it's so important.
That's my point exactly. I mean, you look at the offenses we played this year. They were bottom beating offenses, and remember, we got torched by some of those bottom beating offenses where Neville Hewitt and James Burgess did not look good at all. You have a guy like Avery Williamson who brings more legitimacy than those two guys, especially when you are not going to be going up against bottom beating offenses. You're going up against some top notch.
Boom.
Top notch. So.
Sorry, David, I'm muting you right now because I want to move on to the next topic, so I put you on mute. I figured out the button. I got to figure out animation for this. All right, guys, I love me some Avery Williamson. Actually, NY Sports MC says he's a restricted free agent. We might be able to put a second-round tender on him, $2.5 to $3 million potentially, so that could be an option. But let's move on to our next topic. I want to talk about Robby Anderson. It's a player that is homegrown for us. It's someone that I think everyone wants to have back. Although as it gets closer and closer to free agency, it seems higher and higher probability of him not coming back as a New York Jet. Matt, I'll start this with you. What are your thoughts on the reports coming out of the Jets facility?
Yeah, I'm bothered by it. I think this is a guy you absolutely want to bring back. I know on the surface paying maybe $13 or $14 million for someone who hasn't eclipsed 1,000 yards might seem like it's too much money. But when you take into account that in each of the last 3 years, his starting quarterback has missed 3 games, starting with McCown in 2017 and then Darnold in 2018 and 2019, I think if his starting quarterback plays all 16 games, he goes over 1,000 yards in probably 2 of those 3 years. And I just think he provides a unique skill set that would really help out this offense. He has a great rapport with Sam Darnold. He's one of the best young deep threats in the game. They get paid a lot of money, but I think I would rather pay Robby Anderson, like I said, $13 or $14 million, than pay 20 for Amari Cooper or for overpaying for a guy like Devin Funchess. So I'd rather overpay for Anderson, someone who you found as an undrafted free agent, and keep him around.
David, let's bounce this over to you. What are you thinking for the wide receiver position as far as Robby Anderson goes?
I would have to agree 100%. Like, this is a heartbreaking decision you would have to make because it's the amount of money that Robby Anderson wants is what makes me not want to bring him back. And it hurts to say the least because Matt touched on this immensely well. This is a guy who's pretty much progressed throughout all 3 years of his career. And I know the stats don't speak for it otherwise, but this is a dude who's done everything he can with 3 quarterbacks in his career. He's had Ryan Fitzpatrick throw to him. He's had Josh McCown throw to him. and he's had Sam Darnold throw to him. And this is also a guy who is Sam Darnold's best weapon, and this is probably his best source of continuity for Sam Darnold to grow with. But the money isn't there, and of course the Jets and Robby Anderson are on different sides of in regards to contract. And there's going to be other teams looking at a guy like Robby Anderson, and it's going to be tough to replace him because the market is so thin for receivers, and you could definitely address receiver in the draft. But free agency wise, I mean, Amari Cooper, sure, that could be your best replacement, but you're going to end up throwing more money. Or Devin Funches too. I mean, there's some serviceable guys out there, and I'm going to preview that more in my free agency preview video. But it's hard to bring Robby Anderson back at $15 million a year. I just can't do it.
Green Bean, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking when Matt said earlier that he didn't want to sign Avery Williamson, and a part of that was because he'd like to give that money to Robby Anderson. I will say that if they're looking like they have this all on the table, and they're like, all right, if we keep Avery Williamson, we can't keep Robby, and if we let him go, we can. I would choose Robby Anderson. That's it. And the truth is that I want Robby Anderson. I love him. I like the fact that he's homegrown, undrafted free agent. And that might be dipping into the emotional side of things. And I do get it, that that's not necessarily where you want to live in the emotional realm. But I like him. I think that his ability to explode in our offense, it's not his fault that he hasn't been able to do that. I mean, look at the quarterback play this year. We had Mono and Luke Falk and no offensive line and all that kind of stuff. I think that if this guy can be on a team with the offensive line that gives a quarterback time, he's going to be an invaluable weapon. So now when you compare that to guys like Amari Cooper's on another level. But again, who the hell? I can't see paying a wide receiver $20 million. I can't see it. Now the undrafted. Oh well, we'll get to the other receivers later. But I'd love to keep Robby. I'm thinking $12 million as my max. But again, if it's like, hey, if we let this guy go, we can keep him, do it. The cap's going up every year anyway. What do I care? You know what I mean? That's how I see it.
I think that's very interesting. And for me, I can understand the thought process in letting go of Avery if you can keep Robby. Now, do I want to pay Robby $13 to $15 million a year? Hell no. Sorry, boys. I do not want to pay Robby Anderson that much money. I am a big fan of his. I was projecting 4 years, $12 million a year, or 5 years, $12 million a year. But for $13 to $15 million a year, Robby can go kick rocks. I'm sorry. We have not gotten enough production out of this guy. I like the potential that's there if we had the offensive line, but I think with the offensive line being as patchwork as it is, I think to put that much resources into Robby Anderson would be a mistake. I think since we have that roughly rounded out as far as the Robby Anderson takes, I think we can move on to our next topic. Let's talk about the free agents that are... Whoops, I'm moving the wrong thing. Let's talk about our free agents and the options that could potentially be there. Green Bean, I'll throw this over to you to start. What free agent wide receivers are you potentially looking at to replace Robby Anderson?
Yeah, okay. So let's assume he's gone, that we're not going to keep him. I think the gem as far as value to production in this free agent class of wide receivers is Demarcus Robinson from the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that in the offense that he currently plays, he's an afterthought to some degree. I think he's the third option, maybe even the fourth option at times. Right. Mm-hmm. I think he's got number one ability. Guess what he is? He's an undrafted. Or was he a fourth round pick? No, was he an undrafted? I forget. I think he might have been a fourth round pick.
Fourth round pick sounds right.
Now, just to look real quick, he had 32 catches for 450 yards. He only had 2 drops. I think, again, when he does catch the ball, he always makes something happen with it. That would be the guy. I only see him costing in the 6-ish, maybe. I mean, he was, he's coming off a 4-year contract that was $2 million for all the, he made like $700,000 a year. Going up to $6 million, something like that. I think we're going to be able to get this guy, and we would be delighted if we do.
David,
10-year contract.
Ooh, 10-year contract. Is that what you just said? Get the hell out of here. Look, I like me some Demarcus Robinson. I mean, you got to think he's behind Kelsey, Watkins, Tyreek Hill, and the other receiver, the other fast guy. M.
I can't think of it either. But
Yeah, there's 4 of them that he's behind. David, is there a free agent wide receiver that you're particularly eyeing?
Particularly, I'm eyeing receiver in the draft. I mean, this draft class is immensely stacked with receivers, and you could go probably maybe as early as the second round if you want, because I'm addressing offensive line in the first round regardless, to actually find a new target for Sam Darnold to grow with. Like, there could be guys probably as maybe as late as the 4th round that could put up immediate production. So I'm looking at the draft, but free agent wise, I'm not looking to spend immense amount of money on receivers. I'm spending it on offensive line. So if I were to look at a name, Demarcus Robinson, Kyle, you mentioned it perfectly. He's a big body guy, and he's a solid red zone threat. And that's what we need. We need red zone threats, because we haven't had one since Eric Decker in 2015, if you want to throw Herndon in there. Rashad Perriman could be another one as well. I'm 26 years old, another big body guy. So I'm looking more at the second tier wide receivers that you could probably get on a much cheaper deal. And then I would actually draft a wide receiver in the second round. So that way you can get your 2 receivers, and you can have Crowder in the slot, you can have Crowder out wide. You can mix up various of options, especially since you're probably going to have to throw big money to offensive line, since that's probably going to be Joe Douglas's biggest priority regardless.
So I have to agree to an extent. I mean, I obviously want to attack wide receiver in the draft. Whether it be our first or second round pick is really going to depend on how we handle free agency. I probably see the second round pick being the wide receiver route. In terms of free agency, there's no way I'm going into the draft knowing we don't have Robby Anderson, knowing we don't have Quincy Enunwa. We're probably cutting Bellamy, so we really don't have many options on the roster right now. Emmanuel Sanders is someone that I think we're going to take a hard look at. It's not continuity with Sam, but it's continuity within Gase's system, so I think there's something to be said for that. Players that I particularly like, 2 guys in particular, Brashad Perriman, David brought up, and I actually like Devin Funchess. Funchess hasn't had the opportunity to play with a good quarterback. He had Cam Newton for 3 years and then got injured with his time in Indianapolis. So I think there is an option for him to be a threat with us on the pretty cheap deal. Both those guys, I would not want to overspend in free agency. Matt, I'll kick it to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you guys brought it up. The one guy that I'd be interested in free agency is Perriman. I thought he had a really, really solid end to his season. I'm pretty sure in the last 5 games he had over 70 receiving yards. He came on really, really strong at the end of the year in that offense in Tampa Bay. Obviously, with Jameis at quarterback, talk about inconsistency. You don't know what he's getting on a week-to-week basis there. But if Robby was to walk, which is seeming more and more likely, I think I'd look at bringing in a guy like Perriman, who's a bigger body guy, and then also addressing in the draft in one of the middle rounds. I don't think you can take someone in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, wherever you want to go, outside of the 1st round and expect production from day one. So I think at a minimum you have to bring in someone like Perriman, who would be a cheaper option than Robby Anderson.
And one thing to bring up about Perriman, too, for you guys that don't know him that are in the chat, he is 1 inch shorter than Robby Anderson. He's 25 pounds heavier than Robby Anderson, and he's a whole 1/10 of a second faster in the 40. He ran a 4.25 40. Robby ran a 4.36 40. So you're getting a faster, stronger version of what Robby is. Now, he hasn't had the production that Robby has put up. He bounced around the league a little bit. He was a first-round pick of the Baltimore Ravens, went to Cleveland, went to the Bucs last year, so he's been around the league a little bit. I think you can get him cheaper. I think there's really a lot of potential with him. Greenbean, have you looked into Perriman at all? Or?
And with Perriman, he was on IR his rookie season too, so he's even 1 year younger, if you will, than he looks. And the thing with him, this is what's interesting. He only had 36 catches, but he had 70 targets with 1 drop. What does that tell you about his quarterback play? You know, those things are flying all around. He's got no chance. So this is a guy that was open 70 times. Mm-hmm. And was only, the quarterback could only get him the ball 36 times. Only one of those that weren't receptions was his fault. So this is a guy I really like Perriman. And I think if we were able to grab him, I think that would be a good free agent pull. And I like Emmanuel Sanders. He's old, but he's the kind of guy that's going to play. He's just one of those guys. He hasn't slowed down drastically, in my opinion. He come back from the injury, really well. and I like him. I think, and like you said, Ryan, he's familiar in Gase's system, and if they have a good rapport, there's not many people who like Gase. So if we can find one, I think we might want to keep him around.
Lock him in a little bit. Now, there was some rumors that I think Green Bean, I think you might have seen this article on Jet Nation, and it was something along the lines of Sanders wanting like a pretty hefty deal. And that is not something I want to touch. I'm all for getting Sanders in here, but not for like upwards of $10 million a year. If we can get him for like 8, somewhere around the Crowder type deal, I think I would be all right with that.
Right. I agree.
David, Matt, any other free agent wide receivers that you guys are kind of thinking of?
For me, not really.
I'm just looking at the second tier receivers. That's really it. Like, I'm not overspending for Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I don't want to go really all too much into the wide receiver group in free agency. To me, I'm looking at a guy like Perriman or going through the draft realistically. I'm not really in love with too many guys in this free agency class, got to be honest.
I completely agree, guys. All right, that was a lot of fun. I think that's it for all our topics for today. We'll get back here the same time next week, 9 o'clock. We'll go over a whole bunch of new topics. And, guys, why don't we take it around the horn, say goodbye to the nation. Green Bean, I'll start with you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I'm reading the comments. I see you guys talking. I haven't figured out how to concentrate and talk in the chat. So I'm getting there, guys. I promise. You do see the beard. I'm older than you guys, and I'm slower than you guys. So I do apologize. If there's some good comments going on, Anthony D's one that I see making some comments that I'm actually agreeing with pretty consistently.
David,
I'm happy to be here, man. Good time.
Awesome. David, last thoughts. What are you thinking?
This is a lot of fun, and I love the fan base that we got in the chat right now. Some of them are even subbed to my channel. Guys like Justin, TJ's there, Rob's 25G Lagoon's in there as well. Robert Killian. I mean, these guys are the best, and just doing this around 3 awesome video makers. This is just fantastic. I love doing this panel, and I can't wait to do more.
I love it. Matt, any last words?
My last words, positional value. Don't spend a lot of money on inside linebacker. That's going to be it for me.
I love it, guys. We'll see you here next week, 9 o'clock. Don't forget to sub up all these guys. Their channels are in the description down below. And we will see you next week.